I just want to apologize to any Americans who are out there who still have flight cancellations or delays today. I want to apologize to the many American families who were made to go hungry over the last several weeks, our troops and other federal employees who are wondering where their next paycheck would come from. All of that's on the Democrats. Just never forget, they voted 15 times between the House and the Senate to close your government. And the Republicans tried every single day of the shutdown to open it, and we voted 15 times to do that. They have a lot to answer for, and I just want to say that we're very optimistic about the vote tally tonight. We think this is going to happen, and we're sorry that it took this long. So Republicans are going to deliver for the people. We're ready to get back to our legislative agenda. We have a very aggressive calendar for the remainder of this year. There'll be some long days and nights here, some long working weeks, but we will get this thing back on track.
All right, so Mike Johnson is in full panic mode, like complete meltdown. His speakership is collapsing in real time, and it's absolutely spectacular to watch. We're talking about a speaker who can't control his own caucus, who's losing votes on the House floor, who's being openly threatened with removal by members of his own party, who's having shouting matches with reporters and other members, who looks visibly overwhelmed and defeated every time he steps in front of a camera. This is a man who's drowning, and nobody's throwing him a life preserver. In fact, members of his own party are actively pushing him under. In the Republican Party, it's an absolute chaos, total civil war, conservatives fighting moderates, MAGA hardliners threatening anyone who dares cooperate with Democrats. And Mike Johnson is stuck in the middle, unable to please anyone, watching his authority evaporate day by day. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
House Speaker Mike Johnson scrapped a week's worth of voting after a revolt over proxy voting.
Well, it's a very disappointing result on the floor there. A handful of Republicans joined with all the Democrats to take down a rule. That's rarely done. It's very unfortunate in this case. 96% of House Republicans voted against proxy voting because they believe it's unconstitutional, and they agree that it would open a Pandora's box.
So here's what just went down. On November 13th, 2025, Johnson lost control of the House floor, like literally lost control. He brought a procedural vote to the floor, a vote on a government funding deal that was supposed to prevent a shutdown. And 13 Republicans joined Democrats to block it. 13 members of his own party said no. It revolted. They tanked the vote, and that left Congress paralyzed. Because without that procedural vote passing, the spending bill can't move forward. And without the spending bill, the government shuts down. So Johnson's entire strategy just collapsed, and he had to halt all legislative business, just stop everything, because he doesn't have the votes, he doesn't have control, and he has no idea how to get it back. And it's not just the moderates who are revolting, it's the MAGA hardliners too. Marjorie Taylor Greene is openly talking about filing a motion to vacate the speakership. That's the mechanism they use to oust Kevin McCarthy, and she's saying it's actively in play for Johnson. Thomas Massie is blasting Johnson for betraying conservative principles. Other far-right members are calling this the third betrayal. They're saying Johnson keeps cutting deals with Democrats, keeps abandoning conservative priorities, keeps selling them out, and they're done with it. They want him gone, and they're willing to blow up the House to make it happen. But the moderates aren't happy either. They're saying Johnson has marginalized Congress, that he's kept the House shuttered for weeks at a time, that he's made erratic decisions without consulting the caucus, that he's damaged the party's brand heading into 2026. So you've got conservatives attacking him from the right, moderates attacking him from the center, and Johnson standing there with no allies, no support base, no coalition that he can count on. He's politically isolated. And when you're a speaker without a coalition, you're not really a speaker anymore. You're just a guy with a fancy title who can't actually get anything done. And his demeanor is showing it. Multiple sources describe Johnson as panicking. He's had shouting matches with reporters. He's been visibly frustrated in press events. There was even an incident where a House Democrat crashed his press conference and things got heated. Johnson's losing his cool. He's losing his composure. And when you're the Speaker of the House, when you're supposed to be the calm, collected leader who can navigate difficult situations, losing your cool is a death sentence because it shows weakness. It shows you're overwhelmed. And once your own members see that weakness, they lose respect for you. They stop following your lead. And that's exactly what's happening to Johnson. Now, let's talk about what caused this meltdown, because it's not just one thing. It's a perfect storm of problems. First, there's the government funding fight. Johnson tried to negotiate a bipartisan deal to keep the government open, but conservatives hated it. They said it didn't cut spending enough. It didn't include the policy riders they wanted. It was too much of a compromise with Democrats. So they revolted. They said they'd rather shut down the government than pass a bad deal, and Johnson couldn't convince them otherwise. Then there's the Epstein files controversy that we talked about earlier. Johnson allegedly worked behind the scenes to block the release of files that could damage Trump and other Republicans. And when that became public, a lot of Republicans felt betrayed. They felt like Johnson was putting Trump's interests above transparency and accountability, and that created another faction of Republicans who lost trust in Johnson. And then there's just the general chaos of trying to lead a deeply divided caucus. You've got MAGA hardliners who want total loyalty to Trump and maximum confrontation with Democrats. You've got establishment conservatives who want to govern responsibly and pass legislation. You've got moderates who represent swing districts and need to appeal to independents. And you've got libertarian-leaning members who have their own priorities. Getting all these factions to agree on anything is nearly impossible, and Johnson has completely failed at it. He hasn't been able to build consensus. He hasn't been able to unite the party, and now the party is fracturing, and he's bearing the brunt of the blame. So where does this leave us? Well, we're watching a speaker implode. We're watching the Republican Party tear itself apart. We're watching Congress become completely dysfunctional, and we're heading toward what could be either a government shutdown, a motion to vacate the speakership, or both. The next few weeks are going to be absolute chaos, and Mike Johnson is at the center of it, desperately trying to hold on to power while everyone around him plots his downfall. This is going to be wild. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's dig into exactly how we got here. Because Mike Johnson's collapse didn't happen overnight, this has been building for months. And if you want to understand why the Republican Party is in such chaos right now, you need to understand the series of failures and betrayals that led to this moment. So let's start at the beginning. Mike Johnson became Speaker after Kevin McCarthy was ousted. Remember that? The MAGA hardliners led by Matt Gaetz filed a motion to vacate and got enough votes to remove McCarthy as Speaker. And that threw the House into chaos for weeks. Republicans couldn't agree on who should be Speaker. They went through multiple candidates, multiple votes, and eventually they settled on Mike Johnson as a compromise candidate. He was relatively unknown. He hadn't made a lot of enemies. He was conservative enough for the hardliners, but not so extreme that moderates couldn't support him. So he became Speaker. But from the beginning, there were warning signs. Johnson didn't have a strong power base. He wasn't a master negotiator like Nancy Pelosi or a political heavyweight like John Boehner. He was a relatively junior member who got promoted to Speaker because nobody could agree on anyone else. And that meant he came into the job with very little political capital. He hadn't earned the respect of his colleagues through years of leadership. He hadn't built up favors and relationships that he could call on. He was just a guy who happened to be in the right place at the right time, and that's a really weak foundation for a speakership. And it showed. Almost immediately, Johnson started facing challenges. Conservatives wanted him to take a harder line against Democrats, to refuse any compromises, to use the power of the House to investigate and attack the Biden administration. Moderates wanted him to be more pragmatic, to pass legislation that could actually become law, to work with the Senate and the White House on bipartisan priorities. And Johnson tried to thread the needle. He tried to give both sides a little of what they wanted, but in doing so, he ended up satisfying no one. The first major betrayal, according to conservatives, came on spending. Johnson negotiated a funding deal with Democrats to avoid a government shutdown, and conservatives felt like he gave away too much, that he didn't fight hard enough for spending cuts, that he prioritized keeping the government open over standing on principle, and they were furious. They felt like Johnson had sold them out, that he promised to be a conservative fighter and then immediately compromised with Democrats the first chance he got. And that's when the grumbling started. That's when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene started saying, maybe we made a mistake with this guy. The second betrayal, according to conservatives, involved foreign aid. There were fights over funding for Ukraine, for Israel, for various international priorities, and conservatives wanted to either cut that funding or attach conditions to it. But Johnson, working with moderates and Democrats, passed foreign aid packages that conservatives hated, and again, they felt betrayed. They felt like Johnson was working with Democrats against his own party, and the anger intensified. And then came what conservatives are calling the third betrayal, the Epstein files situation. Johnson allegedly worked behind the scenes to block efforts to release all the Epstein-related documents, and when that became public, it created another firestorm. Some conservatives who wanted transparency felt betrayed. Some moderates who thought Johnson was protecting Trump at the expense of accountability felt betrayed. And Johnson's credibility took another massive hit. So now you've got conservatives saying he's betrayed them 3 times, and in their minds, that's enough. That's the final straw. And that's why Marjorie Taylor Greene is openly talking about a motion to vacate. But it's not just about specific policy betrayals. It's also about Johnson's leadership style. Multiple sources describe him as marginalizing Congress, During the government funding fights, he kept the House in recess for extended periods, just shut down operations rather than dealing with the difficult votes. And members felt like he was avoiding his job, like he was hoping problems would solve themselves rather than actually leading, and that bred resentment, because members want to be in Washington doing their jobs. They want to be voting on legislation. They want to be in committee hearings, but Johnson kept them sidelined while he tried to figure out a strategy that he never actually figured out. And then there's the communication problem. Members complain that Johnson doesn't consult them, that he makes decisions in private with a small group of advisors and then announces them to the broader caucus, and people don't like being kept in the dark. They don't like finding out about major strategic decisions through news reports or after the fact. They want to be part of the process. They want their input to matter, but Johnson's leadership style has been secretive and insular, and that's alienated a lot of people. And all of this dysfunction is happening while the 2026 elections loom. Republicans are worried. They're worried that voters are going to see this chaos and decide that Republicans can't govern, that Democrats will run ads showing the dysfunction in the House, the government shutdown threats, the infighting, and say, do you really want to give these people power? And that could cost Republican seats, could cost them the majority, and members are starting to blame Johnson for that. They're saying your failed leadership is going to cost us our majority, and that's making even members who might otherwise support Johnson start to question whether he should remain Speaker. So now let's talk about the specific incident that happened on November 13th, 2025, the procedural vote. In the House, before you can vote on a final bill, you often need to pass a procedural motion called a rule. It's basically permission to bring the bill to the floor for debate and a vote. And these rule votes are usually party line. The majority party votes yes, the minority party votes no, and the rule passes. But on November 13th, the rule vote for the government funding bill failed because 13 Republicans joined Democrats in voting no. And that's extraordinary, because if you can't pass a rule vote, you can't bring the bill to the floor. And if you can't bring bills to the floor, you can't pass legislation. The House is paralyzed. And why did those 13 Republicans vote no? Because they hated the funding bill. They thought it spent too much money, didn't include their priorities, made too many concessions to Democrats, and they decided to tank it, to just blow it up. Even though that meant risking a government shutdown, even though that meant defying their own speaker, they didn't care. They were willing to burn it all down to make a point. And that tells you everything you need to know about where Johnson stands with his own caucus. He doesn't have the authority to keep them in line. He doesn't have the leverage to force compliance. He's just a figurehead at this point. And the aftermath was chaotic. Johnson had to pull the bill, had to halt legislative business, had to go into closed-door meetings with his leadership team to figure out what to do next. And according to reports, those meetings devolved into finger-pointing and shouting. People blaming each other for the failure, people questioning Johnson's leadership, people arguing about strategy. There was no unity, no sense of, okay, we're all on the same team. Let's figure this out together. It was just chaos and recrimination. And meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing interviews saying a motion to vacate is actively in play, that she's talking to other members about it, that Johnson's time as Speaker might be coming to an end, and that's terrifying for Johnson, because he saw what happened to Kevin McCarthy. One day McCarthy was Speaker, and then suddenly he wasn't, and the same thing could happen to Johnson. If Greene files a motion to vacate and gets enough Republicans to support it, Johnson is done, he's out, and there's no guarantee that Republicans could even elect a new Speaker after that. They might go through weeks of chaos like they did after McCarthy, and that would be even more damaging to the party. All right, let's break this down into the key points you absolutely need to understand. Point number 1, Mike Johnson lost a crucial procedural vote on the House floor because 13 Republicans revolted against him. That's devastating, because procedural votes are supposed to be easy. They're supposed to be party line. The majority party votes together, the bill moves forward, and the legislative process continues. But when you lose a procedural vote, when members of your own party vote against you, that's a vote of no confidence. That's your caucus telling you they don't support your leadership. And that's what happened to Johnson. And now he's paralyzed. He can't move legislation. He can't keep the government open. He can't do his job as Speaker. Point number 2, conservatives are calling this Johnson's third betrayal, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is actively discussing a motion to vacate the speakership. That's the same mechanism they used to oust Kevin McCarthy, and if Greene files that motion and gets enough support, Johnson is done. He's out as Speaker, and the House descends into chaos again. Because finding a replacement Speaker is really hard when your caucus is this divided. It could take weeks. It could be a disaster, and that threat is hanging over Johnson's head right now. He knows that at any moment Greene could file that motion, and his speakership could be over. Point number 3, Johnson's leadership style has alienated both conservatives and moderates. Conservatives think he's betrayed them by compromising with Democrats. Moderates think he's marginalized Congress and mishandled the legislative process. Nobody's happy, And when you're a speaker who has no coalition, who can't count on support from any faction of your party, you're in serious trouble because you need at least some base of support to maintain your position. But Johnson has burned through all of his political capital. He has no allies left who will defend him. Point number 4, Johnson's public demeanor shows he's panicking. He's had shouting matches. He's been visibly frustrated. He's lost his composure in public settings, and that weakness is being noticed by his colleagues. When you're a leader and you show that kind of panic, people lose confidence in you. They start thinking, this person can't handle the pressure. We need someone else. And that accelerates your downfall. So Johnson's own behavior is making his situation worse. He's projecting weakness when he needs to project strength. Point number 5, the government funding crisis is the immediate trigger, but the underlying problems run much deeper. This isn't just about one spending bill. This is about a Republican Party that's fundamentally divided about what it wants to be. Is it Trump's party? Is it a traditional conservative party? Is it a populist movement? Is it a governing party? Nobody knows, and different factions have different answers. And as long as that identity crisis persists, whoever is speaker is going to struggle, because you can't unite a caucus that doesn't agree on its own purpose and direction. Point number 6, the timing of this crisis is terrible for Republicans heading into 2026. They're months away from critical midterm elections, and instead of presenting a unified front, instead of showing voters that they can govern effectively, they're showing chaos and dysfunction. They're showing infighting and failed leadership, and that's going to hurt them electorally. Democrats are going to run ads showing this dysfunction and asking voters if they really want to give Republicans more power. And that's a compelling message when Republicans can't even pass basic legislation to keep the government running. Point number 7, the Epstein Files controversy added fuel to the fire because it made Johnson look like he was protecting Trump at the expense of transparency. And that bothered different factions for different reasons. Some conservatives who value transparency felt betrayed. Some moderates worried it made the party look corrupt. And it was another instance where Johnson's decision-making alienated people. Another instance where he tried to thread a needle and ended up satisfying no one. Point number 8, the parallel with Kevin McCarthy is striking. McCarthy also struggled to control his caucus. He also tried to appease both conservatives and moderates and ended up pleasing neither. He also faced a motion to vacate and got ousted. And Johnson is following the exact same trajectory. He's making the same mistakes. He's facing the same pressures. And he's heading toward the same end. Unless something changes dramatically in the next few weeks, Johnson is going to suffer the same fate as McCarthy. And that would make him the second speaker in a year to be removed by his own party. That's unprecedented. That's a sign of deep institutional crisis. Point number 9, if Johnson is ousted, finding a replacement will be incredibly difficult because the same divisions that made it hard to elect Johnson in the first place still exist. Conservatives want a hardline speaker who will refuse all compromise with Democrats. Moderates want someone who can actually govern and pass legislation. And finding someone who can satisfy both factions is nearly impossible. So if Johnson goes, Republicans could spend weeks fighting over who should replace him. And during that time, the House can't function. No legislation passes. No oversight happens. It's complete paralysis. And that would be catastrophic. Point number 10, this crisis is about more than just one speaker or one party. It's about whether Congress can function at all. Because if the majority party can't elect a speaker, can't pass basic legislation, can't keep the government funded, then Congress isn't working. The legislative branch isn't fulfilling its constitutional role, and that's a problem for the entire country, because we need a functioning Congress to address national problems, to pass budgets, to respond to crises, and right now, we don't have that. We have chaos, and Mike Johnson is at the center of it. So, where does this leave us? Well, Johnson is in desperate straits. His authority is gone. His caucus has turned on him. He's facing potential removal, and he has no clear path to stabilizing his speakership. The next few weeks are going to determine whether he survives or whether he becomes the second speaker in a year to be ousted. And if he is ousted, the chaos that follows is going to be extraordinary because Republicans are going to have to go through the whole process again of trying to find someone who can unite the caucus, and that might not be possible. And in the meantime, the government could shut down. Legislation is stalled. Oversight isn't happening. And the Republican Party looks completely dysfunctional heading into an election year. This is a crisis. A genuine crisis of leadership and governance, and there's no easy solution because the underlying divisions within the Republican Party are too deep. The gap between MAGA hardliners and establishment conservatives is too wide, and whoever is speaker, whether it's Johnson or someone else, is going to struggle with those same divisions. So pay attention to what happens next. Watch to see if Marjorie Taylor Greene files that motion to vacate. Watch to see if Johnson can somehow pull together enough votes to pass a funding bill and avoid a shutdown. Watch to see if his caucus gives him one more chance or if they decide it's time for new leadership. Because what happens in the next few weeks is going to shape not just the speakership, but the future of the Republican Party and the functionality of Congress. This is a pivotal moment. Mike Johnson is in total meltdown. The GOP is in open revolt, and the whole system is teetering on the edge of collapse. Stay tuned, because this story is moving fast, and the next developments could be explosive. Next time, we'll look at who might replace Johnson if he's ousted, and whether any potential replacement could actually do better at uniting this chaotic caucus. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss that analysis of the Republican Party's leadership crisis and what comes next.